Okay. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alex Rubenstein, and I'm an interpretation ranger and education specialist here at Pullman National Historical Park. My talk for today's Lunch and Learn is called Little Strikes Everywhere. And I'm going to be discussing the multiple strikes that happened in the town of Pullman, as well as the reasons that the workers at Pullman were able to organize in spite of numerous barriers to it. A couple of things before we begin. First, before I became a ranger, I was a public elementary school teacher for over 20 years, and therefore I was a member of several unions during that time period. I thought it was important to give you that disclosure. And second, I would like to express my gratitude to Dr. Susan Hirsch, who's a professor emeritus at Loyola University, Chicago, for her research and writings. Her book, After the Strike, A Century of Labor Struggle at Pullman, and her essay, The Search for Unity Among Railroad Workers, The Pullman Strike in Perspective, found in the book, The Pullman Strike and the Crisis of the 1890s, Essays on Labor and Politics, were invaluable to the creation of this talk. And if you'd like to hear her in person on Sunday, August 25th at 3 p.m., she's going to be at the Historic Pullman Foundation's exhibit hall for their monthly speaker series. And her topic is going to be The Struggle for Workers' Control, How Management Rigged the Game to Win. Third, the title of our discussion today, Little Strikes Everywhere, it's a reference to a 2017 novel by Celeste Ng entitled Little Fires Everywhere, and of the 2020 miniseries on Hulu with Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington. According to Deadline Hollywood, it's about the intertwined tales of the picture-perfect Richardson family and an enigmatic mother and daughter who upend their lives. The story explores the weight of secrets, the nature of art and identity, the ferocious pull of motherhood, and the danger in believing that following the rules can avert disaster. Now, the plot of these dramas has nothing to do with 19th century labor politics, but the image that the title suggests, these little flames of conflict rising up against the Pullman Palace Car Company, I think is an excellent metaphor for the smaller strikes at Pullman before the strike of 1894 engulfs Pullman, Chicago, and then really the rest of the country. So some really fast background information. George Pullman started the Pullman Palace Car Company in the mid-1800s to build luxury sleeper cars for the burgeoning rail industry, as well as to run their operation in order to control the quality of the experience of the passengers on board. And to put it mildly, they were a hit. So much so that in 1880, the company bought 4,000 acres of land by Lake Calumet, south of Chicago, next to the Illinois Central Railroad line, so they could build a huge factory for the production of those rail cars. Not only that, the company also built a planned industrial community adjacent to the factory for its workers. This town was remarkable in many ways, from its attractive, sturdy, and well-designed brick homes and public buildings, to its hygienic water supply and waste treatment facilities, to the use of plants and flowers in the urban landscaping. But these amenities that were built to instill the residents with loyalty toward the company were not enough to prevent the workers from feeling dissatisfaction with their wages and their living and working conditions. Workers' pay was mainly decided by the particular contracts that the company negotiated with the railroads, so their pay could change depending on what contract was being worked on. And with the Pullman Company trying to outbid and eventually purchase many of their rivals, they're always trying to minimize costs, often to the detriment of the workers. The management style the company had in place at the time was also a source of friction. To quote Professor Hirsch, the Pullman Car Works, despite its great size, relied on a traditional shop system in which a superintendent gave individual foremen goals to meet, but left them free to choose their own methods to fulfill those goals at lowest costs. Foremen could hire, fire, set wages, and discipline as they saw fit. Some foremen were fair, but others played favorites, demanding kickbacks and cursed and hit workers, unquote. This led to suspicions by workers that they were being cheated out of pay. Foremen who did not meet their goals were frequently fired and replaced by ones who were more ruthless in their behavior. Pullman Company had several different methods to try and prevent the unity and solidarity needed to enact a strike. One of the reasons that the factory and town of Pullman were built far enough from the city limits of Chicago at the time was the hope that the groups trying to unionize the workers in the city wouldn't make the trip 14 miles south. That obviously didn't work, as many workers in the early years of the factory joined the Knights of Labor and other craft-specific groups. One method that the company used to divide the labor force was by race. White workers were considered for factory work, for administrative and managerial work. Black workers were hired for service work, whether it be the Pullman porters who worked on board the rail cars or as staff at the Hotel Florence. White conductors supervised the black porters, and there was no consideration for a porter to move into the conductor role. This separation played strongly in the 1894 strike, when the porters were not allowed to join the American Railway Union, and so therefore did not support that strike. There's speculation to this day about what might have happened with the support of the Pullman porters. Jobs were divided by gender as well. Women were relegated to what was considered women's work, or extensions of activities typically done by women in the household, sewing, laundry, and cleaning. The railway's interiors were cleaned by women and the exteriors by men, and in both of those cases, wages for black workers and women of any race were less than for white men. Another way of keeping workers from finding solidarity was hiring European migrants and immigrants. There were many workers who came to Pullman from Europe who sent thousands of dollars back to families in their home countries, eventually returning themselves. The thought was that these workers wouldn't interfere with their paychecks, which, although not great, might be better than back home. The variety of languages and cultures at Pullman was also an issue. Union meetings frequently had to be in English, German, and Swedish. Despite these differences, the white workers at Pullman, male and female, were experiencing many of the same issues: repeated wage cuts, the switch from hourly pay to piecework, long hours, and inconsistent supervision. This gave them a common cause to unite against. Workers joined traditional craft unions, the Knights of Labor, as well as reaching out to socialist groups like the International Working People's Association. Before I begin listing the strikes that I was able to find in my research, I want you to think for a moment and take a guess about how many strikes you think I'm going to mention. I am going to limit the strikes that I bring up to those happening at the town of Pullman. There were others, like at the Detroit Car Works, that occurred roughly at the same time as some of the other strikes at Pullman. And then there were some at other facilities, like on March 6, 1883, where workers at the St. Louis repair shops went on a one-day strike to protest the hiring of a man from China. So, you have your guess? If you guessed 6 or 7, congratulations. You must have seen this graphic in our visitor center here at Pullman. The sign lists 6 years with an additional one mentioned in the 1888 paragraph as occurring in 1891. But that is not the answer. There's quite a few more. By the way, the majority of the newspaper clippings that I'm about to show you come from mainly 3 sources: the Chicago Daily Tribune, the New York Times, and another Chicago paper with a really great name, the Inter-Ocean. So here we go. April 23rd, 1881, around 100 Pullman carpenters went on strike, wanting $3 a day instead of $2.50. The company telegraphed the headquarters in Chicago, who said to fire the strikers and hire others. And about 2/3 of the workers then went back to work. February 15th, 1882, which is the first one listed in our exhibit. 1,000 workers striked to protest the fact that they could no longer get discounted fares on the Illinois Central trains between Pullman and Chicago. The men were commuting from Chicago before all the housing was complete. Each round-trip ticket was worth 20 cents, but Pullman was charging the workers 10 cents. The company was paying the railroad about $8,000 a month for the tickets. First, the painters and carpenters, then others from other departments left. About 700 men met later at the Market Building to discuss forming a union and meet with the managers. They wanted to also go back to semi-monthly paydays and a 10-hour workday. They were at 9, so my guess was that they were at a slow period and wanted to get their full wages of having a 10-hour workday. Also, the question of rents was brought up. The committee stated that some of the men claimed that they could not continue to live at Pullman on account of the exorbitant rates in rents. The company, in response to that, said it was just bringing the rents into their proper amount and that they were previously discounted. But by the next day, the company agreed to pay twice monthly and a 10-hour workday, but not to change its mind on the train fares. Some of the strikers decided to just quit, receive their owed pay. Others continued to strike. The cabinet makers later had a meeting to determine if they wanted to form a union or join the Knights of Labor. By February 21st, the strike was over. The Pullman Company seems to be open to hire back any workers who had quit, and, quote, holds no animosity towards the strikers, unquote. This happened several times at the end of these little strikes, by the way. Okay. Next one, July 27th, 1882, the first of the brickyard strikes, the first of several. Out of 260 men employed in the brickyards, 220 go on strike, leaving about 40 left. 100 of them are Canadian, according to the New York Times. They're striking for better pay, about 25 cents more per day. There didn't appear to be a union or a leader of any kind. During the day, most of the men were hanging out around the saloons of Kensington. The company planned on hiring other men to do their work. The strike ends the next day with about 30 of the strikers fired, the others going back to work. And those who were fired had already been replaced. August 18th, 1882, just about a month later, 150 hod carriers and bricklayers went on strike. They were being paid $1.75 a day, wanting $2. They also complained about bad timekeeping and having to pay car fare from and to Chicago. This lasted about a day. But if you take a look at the headline, Troubles in Many Trades, the newspapers during this time were filled with reports of strikes in every conceivable profession. There were just lists and lists of these, many, many articles I came across like this throughout my research. Okay, July 18th, 1883. The Chicago Daily Tribune reports that brickworkers go on strike again, asking for an increase of 25 cents per day. The truckers and dumpers were unhappy that the pit shovelers had gotten a 25-cent raise earlier in the week. The next day, it's reported that strikers were paid off yesterday and new men were being hired. March 4th, 1884. This is the second one mentioned in our exhibit. This strike concerned workers building freight cars and their assistants. A group of 4 car builders were receiving $15 for completing a car, and that was split 4 ways. 2 months previous to this date, the pay was reduced to $14, and last week it was down to $12 a car. The men claimed that it takes 15 hours to build a car, so their daily pay was down to under $3. The assistants were getting $1.50 a day, which was then reduced to $1.30 a day. Over 100 workers were out of the shops during the strike. July 17th, 1884, another brickyard strike. The brickmakers are nearly all Canadians who live either at the brickyards or in Kensington. A Pullman official said they were going to be all laid off due to less demand for brick, but were then decided to keep them on at a reduction of wages, 25 cents less per day than what they had been making previously. By July 19th, it's reported 195 men came back to work, and the reduction of 25 cents that was previously announced continued to be enforced. September 30th, 1885. There seems to have been some confusion from different parts of the Pullman organization in this one. Workers at the factory were told by managers there would be a 10-cent decrease in wages, both per diem and by piecework. But officials at headquarters in Chicago first disavowed any cuts. By October 2nd, though, they acknowledged them. Some of the workers finished working under older contracts were receiving the old pay, but as soon as the new contract came into play, they decided to quit and not work at the newest pay level. The night before, there was a meeting of the Knights of Labor where 100 more men joined. By October 10th, though, 600 working men, most from Pullman, met at Wolf's Hall in Kensington, where a Knights of Labor representative presided. The Knights usually don't condone strikes, so that was settled shortly after that. May 1st, 1886, the next strike listed in our exhibit. Previously, on April 30th, the New York Times reported that 1,000 men met to discuss the subject of an 8-hour workday, but had no agreement. The company claims that the contracts have already been made and would throw off their budgets for the next year if they were to move to that. The May 1st, 1886 had been set as a possible general strike by the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Movements in response to the desire for an 8-hour workday. So on Saturday, May 1st, the Inter-Ocean reported that 300 Pullman cabinet makers took a holiday from working and tried to get other departments to do so as well. They also tried to get the support of the Knights of Labor, who they wanted to turn into a strike, but it failed on that day. Also that day, workers from the Pullman Car Wheel Works and Union Foundry worked 8 hours instead of the full 10, and then marched off the job at that point. May 4th, 850 men in different departments quit work, and a committee met with Mr. Pullman asking for an 8-hour day and 10% increase in wages. Pullman refused. There was a meeting of about 3,000 to 4,000 people that evening with proceedings in English, German, and Swedish. May 4th is a very important date in this because it was also the day of the Haymarket riot and bombing. I really won't go into the Haymarket affair here, although it was a very, very important event in Chicago and really world labor history. Well, that is definitely perhaps a discussion for another day. The next day, though, May 5th, 1886, the New York Times reported 3,000 men laid down their tools to join the 1,000 who had already struck. And by May 6th, it's reported that men are out in every department. Later on in the month, by May 14th, it was probable that all departments at Pullman were working at full force. Workers who were hired to replace the ones who left. And that was optimism by the part of the company because the strike continued beyond that. On May 17th, the reporter was getting conflicting messages from the company and the workers. The Knights of Labor, though, at a meeting that evening said that they should either all go back together or all stay out together. If they felt that they should stay out, they should leave Pullman and look for work and lodgings elsewhere. They also counseled against violence. And so the next day, May 18th, it's reported that 1,000 men were back at work, and the night before, and at the meeting that evening, the strike was called off completely. By May 27th, though, the Sterling Standard Review printed that 300 brick workers go back to work at the old rates, and every department is back to full strength. On to May 13th, 1887. 300 brick workers go on strike. Men complain that they're getting 40 to 80 cents less per day than workers in other brickyards. Both the union and non-union men walked out at the same time. By June 9th, the brick worker strike was still going on, and a general bricklayer strike in Chicago occurred at the same time that was heading toward arbitration. But by July 7th, 1887, a strike at the brickyards had been called off and 140 men went back to work. January 6, 1888, another one listed in our exhibit. The entire wood carving force of 80 went on strike. The reason was they wanted to be their own separate department with their own foreman. They didn't like being in the cabinet department and their foreman. The strike was endorsed by the Wood Carvers Union. A month later, on February 10, 1888, the Tribune reported that the wood carvers were still on strike, and some men from the cabinet works had been pressed into service to do the wood carving, but were not doing it very well. Carving machinery had also been introduced, but didn't work well either. Strikers were threatening to extend the strike to the Detroit works if no settlement was forthcoming. February 9th, 1888. At the same time as the woodworkers' strike, 130 car erectors and 800 other men in the Pullman freight shops who had been out for 2 or 3 days returned to work yesterday morning. For an order of cars, some particular cars were heavier than others, and the men asked for $1 more. This was refused, but an agreement was made, and they went back to work. December 27th, 1890. This is somewhat of a confusing one. Rumors of a strike at Pullman due to a proposed cut in wages affecting 200 blacksmiths and their helpers, a 10-cent reduction in the price of their piecework. A similar reduction was given to the inside finishers and the bodybuilders. Superintendent Sessions said they were paying too high prices for the piecework. The next day, December 28th, it's reported that the company feels like the strike won't go forward. Sessions was saying that this was not a cut in wages, but an adjustment of the contract prices of piecework. The adjustment had to be made in order to enable us to keep them employed and secure work against competitors. But according to the strikers, not so much, that the blacksmith held a meeting at Fuchs Hall in Kensington, where some said they would not accept the cuts, but instead go on day wages. The carpenters and others were waiting to see what the blacksmiths do. By the 30th, the strike was settled at a conference that was had by Sessions and the blacksmith. January 29th, 1891. Blacksmiths' helpers go on a brief strike. After 3 helpers are suspended, the rest of the staff demanded to know why. And without the helpers, the blacksmiths couldn't work, so the whole shop closed. A committee met with Superintendent Sessions at his office, who explained that they had not been fired but were just suspended for taking a day off without notifying their supervisor, and things appeared to have been settled. February 24th, 1891, another strike at Pullman. It even sounds like even the editors at the Tribune were getting tired of this. Another strike at Pullman. They were getting $12 per car, the freight car workers. They were getting $12 per car, but then we're told they were going to be getting only $10 a car. They tried to negotiate $11 per car, but were rejected. It's reported that they were largely idle, and Sessions said that they were being paid better than others in the industry, and there were many applicants for work at Pullman, and said they would have no trouble filling the positions. By March 4th, the car builders were still on strike, but many of them were let go, and many strikebreakers were brought in and hired to have those positions. Police were involved with this. Strikers were also served eviction notice from their homes in Pullman, those who lived in Pullman. And by March 16th, there were about 35 out of the 130 car builders who still rented homes in Pullman. They hadn't moved out yet, but they were expected to do so without issue. The company said it needed those houses as no one in town would rent to the newcomers, those strikebreakers. The company also said that no strikers at this time were to be considered for rehiring. This next one, I'm not counting as a strike against the Pullman Company, but I thought that this was interesting. A strike of, quote, all the carpenters, gas fitters, stone cutters, plumbers, and other union men now employed in the construction of George M. Pullman's Palm House on Prairie Avenue, costing about $100,000, which is about $3.5 million in today's money. It was now being erected at Calumet Avenue and 18th Street. Was going to happen May 3rd, however. The Tribune reports that it didn't happen. My guess is the upcoming wedding of Harriet Pullman in June led them to go past that and complete the work. December 13th, 1893, about 5 months before the Great Strike of 1894, a steamfitters strike against wages happened. The workers who participated were blacklisted and not only couldn't go back to work at Pullman, but were prevented from finding similar work anywhere in Chicago. And guess what? That's all I've been able to find so far. I'm going to continue doing more research on this topic because some of these I wasn't able to find when exactly the strikes did end, and there was a bit of confusion between different reports and newspapers. So I think this is a topic that could definitely return to with some even more specific dates. So how many have we got? The tally, please, now, Vanna. 16 strikes against the Pullman Company between 1880 and 1893. I'm feeling like the count, saying 16. So that's a little more than one per year. So as you can see, that the strike of 1894 didn't come from nowhere. There was a great gradual build-up to that, and they were able to do it because they had all this other practice in solidarity and coming together during these smaller strikes. It just went into overload for the 1894 one and got the entire country involved with their strike.